Hello, and a happy Beltane to anyone listening to this. This is a story set at Beltane to mark the festival, which is, if you're not familiar with the traditions of ancient Ireland, a feast marking the start of summer, a time when the warriors would depart from their winter restings and go out to live amongst the woods and the forests and the mountains and the valleys, and to reform their warrior bands once again. This particular story tells the tale of a young lad known initially as Demne but later as Fionn, and how he came into his own wisdom, his own knowledge, his own power, his own magic. It's a story of discovery, a story of adventure. Death had followed Demne since early childhood, since infancy, when his own father, even before his child had actually left the womb and been born, when his own father, Cumhaill, was slaughtered by one of his enemies, Gaelic, a man who swore to destroy the entire line and lineage of Cumhaill, and hunted down his pregnant wife, willing to slaughter her and the baby in her womb. And so she fled. Myrna fled into the forests. Deeper and deeper and deeper she went, until finally she came to the house of two druid women who lived in the depths of the forest, and there she gave birth and asked them to raise her child, while she herself, once she had recovered her strength, fled on to lead a false trail should Gaelic ever come to find out where she was. And those two druid women, Bomel and Leolucha, raised that child as if he were their own. They taught him the ways of the forests, of plants and trees, of birds and creatures. They taught him the ways of the druids, to study the stars, to study the passage of clouds, to predict the weather, to know the law of the land, to know the way of the old gods. They raised him as best they could, and as that child grew and grew and grew, it was clear this was no ordinary child. This was a child gifted in learning. This was a child skilled in physical arts, in running and leaping and jumping and climbing, in all manner of things, such that very early on in his life he began to draw the attention of the people around him. And soon, in one of their many adventures together, he earned the name of Fionn. Fionn the wise, Fionn the brave, Fionn the quick, Fionn the blessed, for such is what the name means. And as his name began to spread, the two druid women realised that sooner or later word would reach the ears of Gaelic, and brutal man though he wasn't a foolish man. He would start eventually to put two and two together and realise that this child in the woods was the descendant of his sworn enemy. And so they decided that as Fionn had reached the age of adulthood, it was wise for him to move on. Heavy though their hearts were to let him go, it was for his own safety, to push him further away, so that should Gaelic ever come hunting, he would not find the boy in the house of the two women. And after much discussion, they decided he should be passed on into the tutelage of an ancient wise old druid, Finnegas, who would also be able to instruct the lad in the ways of manhood. So the two women took him to where Finnegas lived, further still into the depths of the forest, where there was a great well. And by well I don't mean one of those things you cast pennies into and lower buckets down to bring up water. I mean a great cauldron where a waterfall fell into the earth, boiling and bubbling and churning. A sacred well, a sacred body of water, a great pool in the depths of the forest of crystal clear, beautiful water, and around the rim of this pool grew 9 ancient hazel trees. And in the late autumn of the year their nuts would drop and land into the churning waters. And in those churning waters there lived the Salmon of Wisdom, an ancient beast, older than Finnegas, older than the two women, older than all of them added together. And that salmon had in its youth eaten the nuts that fell from the 9 hazel trees, and by consuming the nuts of the trees, it had consumed the wisdom of the trees. And those trees were ancient. Those trees, though they were rooted to the spot, they had eyes and ears in the form of all of the birds and the squirrels and the insects that dwelt within their foliage, upon their bark, within their roots. Creatures that would scurry about the world and bring information back to those 9 hazel trees, and so that salmon was as learned could be, even though it had never once left the pool in which it dwelt. And Finnegas had determined that he would eat the flesh of the salmon. And just as the salmon had consumed the wisdom of the trees, so he, Finnegas, would consume the wisdom of the salmon in his turn. And for year after year after year after year, he sat upon the banks of the churning pool, fishing, trying to capture the salmon of wisdom. And could he? No. But at last he was brought a young, energetic lad, Fionn McCall, to help him in his task. And as well as teaching Fionn McCall all that he himself knew, and he was a very wise old man, he had the help and assistance of this lad, for his own fingers had grown stiff and gnarled with arthritis and the passing of the many decades. And so the young lad was able to help him finally capture the salmon of wisdom that dwelt in the pool. And this huge salmon was placed upon a spit and turned over a fire. And the old man went off to gather more wood and said to the young lad, "You sit and you keep turning the spit to ensure the flesh of the fish is properly cooked." And the young lad did exactly as he was told. He turned the fish, watching it cook slowly, that wonderful aroma coming from the fish. And he noticed that some of the scales of the fish, the skin of the fish, was starting to bubble with the heat. All of the juices within the fish heating up, hissing and bubbling and spitting and going to get out. And so he reached out with his thumb and burst the bubble. And the juices contained therein splattered on his thumb, some of them dripping into the fire. But obviously it was so hot that it scalded the young lad's thumb. And so he did what pretty much all of us do when our skin is scalded. He went, and licked it and consumed the juice of the fish. When old Finnegas came back, he said to the young lad, "Have you tasted the fish?" And the young lad said, "No, I have not. Not a morsel has passed my lips." "What is the scald upon your finger?" said the old man. And, being an honest boy, Fionn McCall told him how he had burst the bubble on the fish's side. And Finnegas sat upon the grass with a heavy heart and held his head in his hands, and was in that way for some minutes until the young man said, "What's wrong?" And the old man said, "You have tasted the salmon of wisdom. Clearly this is a sign from the gods that the salmon of wisdom is meant for you and not me. All of these years I've been sitting here trying to capture the fish, thinking it was for myself. And now, irony of ironies, it's for you. Youth has come to inherit the wisdom of age." And the young lad said, "No, you must have it. You've all these years you've been spending fishing and waiting and studying and trying to capture it. You must have it." But the old man was adamant. "You have tasted first, therefore you must finish the fish." And so, at the old man's insistence, the fish was finally cooked, cut up, placed upon a plate and presented to the young Fionn McCall, and he sat and he ate the fish, the salmon of wisdom. And just as when that fish in its lifetime had gained the wisdom of the trees by consuming the nuts that fell from them, as morsel after morsel after morsel passed the young lad's lips, he felt knowledge and learning and wisdom and insight and understanding and magic and power coursing through every fibre of his being. He understood more than he had ever understood in his life, and he was already extremely intelligent. And not just knowledge, he felt strength and agility and understanding and magical abilities flowing through him. And when the meal was finished, the old man said, "You have learnt more than I will ever know, and the time has come for you to move on in life, to bigger and greater and grander adventures. The time has come for you to claim back the kingdom that was your father's right and is your inheritance." And the old man led the young man out through the woods to lead him on to the next chapter in his life. But that is the end of this story, and marks the transition of the year from winter to summer and the beginning of a new cycle. Happy Beltane.